What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name's Will. Welcome to my world where we do a whole bunch of fun sports-related videos like this one. And today we're going to do one of my favorite videos of the year. We are looking at every single college football team. We're going to put all of the alumni together that are playing in the NFL right now, and we're going to see who the best team is. And I'm going to go through what that means as we move forward in this. We're going to go over a couple of ground rules as well. But basically what that means is if we took all the NFL players playing this season, sorted them by what college they went to, what team, once we did all that, would be the best? And that's something that I like to do because it's not necessarily what college has the best players. Because sometimes colleges, are known as wide receiver U, they're known as DBU, where they have a lot of great players, but they all play the same position. This is a little bit different. I want to see if we put an actual team together and had them play, what team would come out on top. So you can't just have the best players, you have to have a complete team. So we're going to go through, I have 12 teams that I think have a credible shot of putting together a team. We're going to go through those, see what team would come out on top. We could also put these through in Madden. Maybe at some point I'll do a part 2. I'll add these teams in Madden, have them play each other. The teams that you would expect are probably going to be here at the end. But I think it's a fun exercise to see what team is the best. So let's just jump right into it before we just talk too much about it. There are 12 teams that I mentioned that I think have a credible shot to put a team together. And not all 12 colleges or universities have every single position. Some of them you'll see have a few gaps. To me, when I was putting these together, you had to have a quarterback. If you don't have a quarterback, I'm not going to give you just a random one. You have to have a quarterback and you have to have a majority of positions. Not all the teams that I have here have every single position filled out. In that case, we're going to just treat them like adding a replacement player in their position. Only other thing I'll add before we get to the 12 teams is I took these rosters from earlier in this NFL season, and you had to be on the active roster. I'm not taking players that just aren't on an active roster right now. I'm not taking players that may be out for the year on IR. It's just players that were on active rosters when I pulled them. I think for the most part, I was able to get everybody. If I missed a player here or there, somebody went to a school that you went to that I should have added, let me know. But I think we got pretty much everybody on these rosters. So without further ado, let's jump into the 12 teams. I split them up by 3 tiers, and we're going to do the first one first. I'm going to call these the honorable mentions. They just barely got a team in place. They wouldn't really have a shot if we put all these 12 teams together. Those 4 teams in alphabetical order are the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, Stanford Cardinal, Texas Longhorns, and Washington Huskies. Next here, I'm going to call the consolation bracket. They are good teams, and we're going to look at the rosters for all 12 of these teams in a second. Not quite enough to be in the top 4, but still good. I have the Michigan Wolverines, the Oklahoma Sooners, Oregon Ducks, and USC Trojans in the consolation bracket. So they're not quite good enough to be in the top 4. The top 4, I'm going to wait to reveal, although you can probably guess who it is. But let's just go quickly through these 8 teams because it's fun to just look at what their team would be like. Starting with the honorable mentions, we'll throw up Notre Dame's depth charts that I put together. When you look at some of this, I get you might think that this would not be a good football team. Their only quarterback is Riley Leonard. Only receivers right now, Ben Skoranek, Bo Collins. You might think, no, this is not even worth talking about. But what Notre Dame has excelled at, and it's pretty clear based on this depth chart, is offensive line and tight ends. And when you can put together a line with Ronnie Stanley, Joe Alt, Quentin Nelson, 3 of the top offensive linemen win healthy in the league. When you can put Cole Kmet, Michael Mayer, Tommy Tremble, Durham Smythe, solid tight ends as well, that's a good tight end group. That's a really good offensive line. So it was at least worth shouting out. I think Notre Dame would lack in other areas. As I mentioned, passing game would struggle. Defensively, not a ton of big names on this group, but safety, you could call Notre Dame safety U if you wanted to, because Kyle Hamilton, Julian Love, Harrison Smith, Xavier Watts. 3 of those have been great safeties for a while. Xavier Watts looks good early on in his rookie year. So not a lot on defense, but safety, really good group. So not a great team overall, but Notre Dame, really good offensive line, really good safeties, some good tight ends, just not much in the rest of the roster. So they fall in the honorable mentions. Next team in the honorable mentions was the Stanford Cardinal. pretty bare, and this is probably the barest group of all 12 teams. I just wanted to shout them out for a few reasons. When you look at some of the players, they got some good names. Obviously, we all remember Christian McCaffrey, probably a decade ago. Now, at this point at Stanford, he would be the focal point of the offense. If you believe what the Eagles fans would say, Tanner McKee's a good quarterback. So you put Tanner McKee with Christian McCaffrey. Alec Eiermanner, pretty good rookie year for Tennessee. Michael Wilson has come on these last few weeks for Arizona. Some good tight ends. Stanford always has good tight ends. It's a decent offense. It's nothing crazy, especially when we compare to some of the top teams, but it's a decent offense. Defense is where it's going to lack a little bit. Just not a ton of depth and a ton of guys back there. So they definitely fall in the honorable mentions, but I thought the offense was worth shouting out. Next team in the honorable mentions might be surprising, but I have the Texas Longhorns. The problem is they just don't have a quarterback. And maybe you're a Quinn Ewers fan. When we're talking about some of the best teams we're putting together, Quinn Ewers as your quarterback just isn't going to cut it. Other than that, they just don't have any interior offensive linemen, which is a little tough. Although Kelvin Banks Jr. looks like a good left tackle for New Orleans. They've got some players. Obviously, Bijan Robinson would be a big part of their offense. A lot of the receivers that have come out recently, whether that's Xavier Worthy, Adonai Mitchell, Matthew Golden, some good young receivers. And then I think on the defensive side, some good young players as well. Byron Murphy, I think, is having an all-pro year for Seattle. I really like Jahdae Barron when he was at Texas. Looks good in more of a secondary role for Denver. So there's pieces, but I don't think there was enough just as a full team that I could put them up really higher. So Texas, maybe a little surprising, but when you put it out on the roster, just not a ton there. So they are in the honorable mentions. And then the last team is my alma mater, the Washington Huskies. They can put together a surprising group. Now, you'll see there's no running backs, although Myles Gaskin, Savon Ahmed, in recent years have had some run in the NFL who were Huskies. Jonah Coleman, he'll be a running back in the league next year. It's not a great group, and especially if the team from a couple years ago, led by Michael Penix, Rome Odunze, Jalen McMillan, Jalen Polk, who I don't have here, if that group and if that core isn't going to be very good in the NFL, the Huskies are going to struggle. Because Penix hasn't looked great, and now he's out for the year. Rome Odunze has had moments, but hasn't really caught on. Jalen McMillan was out for most of the year. So if those three aren't going to be great, the Huskies team isn't going to be that good. But they have a decent amount of tight ends. They have some good offensive linemen who I like. And then some really good defensive players, especially in their secondary. And I think that's something that the Huskies here on the West Coast don't really get a ton of press, did a ton of coverage, especially when we're talking about, wide receiver U, DBU. The Huskies are a very underrated defensive back school, and they have been for the past decade. I'm not saying they are up there in the top with, some of these big SEC schools, but when you can put together a group of Trent McDuffie, Byron Murphy, Kyler Gordon, Elijah Molden, that's a really good cornerback group. And then Budda Baker, Taylor Rapp, a couple older players, but Budda Baker especially has been great for a while. Throw in Vita Vea in the middle. It's a good defense. And so I think they are at least worth a shout out. They need Penix and they need this offense to do a little bit better to really have a shot at anything, but they put together a team. We'll see how some of these young players evolve over the next few years. Now let's go through the consolation bracket teams. I already mentioned them. Michigan is one of them. You can see here, this is where we start to get some of the more complete teams. And what we're going to lack is the true star power. But Michigan is putting together a pretty complete team. And you can see pretty much every position is too deep. So there's a lot of Michigan Wolverines in the NFL. The problem is, and you're going to see that with all these consolation teams, there's just not enough star power to really put them over the top. And I think you see that here with Michigan. A good offense. They have most of the positions. It's just when J.J. McCarthy and Blake Corum are your quarterback running back duo, that worked a couple years ago in college when they won the championship. When we're talking the NFL, it's just not going to quite cut it, especially when we get to the top teams. Nico Collins obviously is an elite receiver. Colston Loveland looks like he's going to be an elite tight end. A.J. Barner, really underrated tight end as well. It's a solid offense, but there's just not a ton of big star power besides maybe Nico Collins. They have a good offensive line, competent pieces around, but it's just not enough to get out of the consolation bracket. Kind of the same thing with the defense, although we do get more star power on the defense. It's kind of what Michigan's been known for recently. Aiden Hutchinson obviously is a star. Guys like Mason Graham, Will Johnson look like they could be future stars. So there's pieces and there's a lot of depth, just not quite enough to get them over the top. So Michigan falls into the consolation bracket. Next team up is the Oklahoma Sooners. This is also a good time to note that players are listed based on where they finished school and where they were drafted from. So where they are listed, someone like a Jalen Hurts finished his career in Oklahoma, obviously started in Alabama, but he's listed as an Oklahoma Sooner. This is also the first time where we could actually have a quarterback controversy. If you want to put Jalen Hurts first, that's fine. Baker started off the year being like an MVP candidate. Hasn't looked good since, but I would argue neither has Jalen Hurts. So you could probably go between both guys. Jalen Hurts could also just turn into a version of Taysom Hill. Comes in for his tush push, comes in for short yardage. You could work with that. But two good quarterbacks in this case, and two good quarterbacks behind a really good offensive line. I mean, Trent Williams, Lane Johnson, Creed Humphrey, three of the elite offensive linemen in this league. Trent Williams and Lane Johnson are also on their way out of the league. So at some point, this team is not going to look as good. But for right now, a really good offensive line behind two good quarterbacks, two capable running backs, I think in Ramondre Stevenson and Samaje Perine. And then they have their big-time receiver in CeeDee Lamb. So I think that combination of a good offensive line, capable quarterbacks, and a capable run game with an elite receiver, that's the recipe for a good offense. It's not an elite offense, I think, with this group, but a capable offense that could put together some good, tough drives. The problem is their defense. And you can see there, not a lot of depth at all. Pretty much no secondary Oklahoma players in the NFL. Really, the only guy is Nick Medito, the pass rusher for Denver, who's taken off the last couple years. Jalen Redmond has kind of come out of nowhere from Minnesota. He's looked good. Other than that, just not a ton of guys for Oklahoma. Just literally not a ton of defensive players. So if we're putting this team into actual game-like situations, their offense could control the ball. The offense could put up some points. Their defense just would be a mess. So for that reason, they're in the consolation bracket. Even if you like their offense, defense just wouldn't cut it. Next team is the Oregon Ducks. One of the most balanced teams, I think, in this exercise. You can see pretty much every position is filled, and for the most part, filled with solid players. Justin Herbert, Bo Nix, two good quarterbacks. Bucky Irving, a really good running back. Wide receivers, a little bit maybe of a weak point, although Troy Franklin and Tez Johnson have both had moments. Some good tight ends, good offensive line, good defensive line. DeForest Buckner, Derek Harmon, Eric Armstead have looked good. Kayvon Thibodeau off the edge. And then a good secondary. Christian Gonzalez, one of the best corners in the league. Diamondor Lenore would be a pretty good number two. So just good players all across the board. I think the only reason Oregon doesn't get into the top group and doesn't get into this conversation is there's just not enough star power. And again, that's the difference between the consolation bracket and the top teams. When we get to the top teams, and I know you can name the colleges, there's star players all around. And Oregon has good players, and you could argue some star players here and there, but just not enough to put them over the top. So they fall in the consolation bracket, but it would be a good team to put together. And then the last consolation team before we get to the top is the USC Trojans. This one is hard because when you can put together Caleb Williams and you can give him a receiving core of Amon-Ra St. Brown, Drake London, and Michael Pittman Jr., that's a really fun passing attack. And I don't know how good their offensive line would be to kind of hold for Caleb Williams or even Sam Darnold, if you want to put Sam Darnold. That, along with Woody Marks being the only running back, might limit this offense a little bit, but it would still be an elite offense, and I like the offense. But the problem is, just like Oklahoma and some others, I don't think quite enough on defense. Leonard Williams is great. Uchenna Nwosu is great. Talanoa Hufanga has looked good for Denver. Other than that, just not a ton on defense. And so that would hold them back to what's holding them back from the top group. All right, so now we got the consolation guys out of the way. Some good teams in that group, but now let's really settle the debate. What would be the best team? And I think there's going to be some debate, and you're going to have some preference. But in reality, you're coming to one of these 4 teams. You're going to have either Alabama, Georgia, LSU, or Ohio State. And it's probably the 4 teams you expected. There's some great players all over this group. Every single position for a lot of these teams has good players. So we're going to go through all 4 teams, and then we're going to decide who would actually win if we put them into a playoff bracket. Starting with Alabama, they might have the best defense out of this group. And we're going to start with their defense, because when you can put together a defensive line rotation of Will Anderson, Quinnen Williams, Christian Barmore, Jonathan Allen, Jaron Reed, Dallas Turner off the edge, that's an elite group. And that would be a really hard team to run the ball against. That would also be a team that could get some pass rush as well. That's great. But then when you say you have Pat Surtain, you have Marlon Humphrey, you have Terrion Arnold, Brian Branch, Xavier McKinney, Minka Fitzpatrick, that's an elite secondary. Throw in some good linebackers, and that's an elite defense. And we'll compare them to the other 3 teams, but I would argue this is the best defense of any of these teams, would be the Alabama's defense. Offensively, still great, and I don't want to take anything away from them. Offensively is going to be a little bit of their weak point, especially when we compare to some of these other teams. A lot of that is going to be quarterback, and Bryce Young has looked great at times. He's also looked terrible at times this year for Carolina. I do think he would look good in this situation because he looked good in college because he had great players around him. So I think he would be okay, but he would also probably ranked 4th out of the 4 teams. So that's a lot of the question is quarterback. He would be surrounded by an incredible running back room. I mean, Derrick Henry, Josh Jacobs with Jahmyr Gibbs, just kind of as your scat back, just throwing him the ball out of the backfield. That's probably the best running back room in this exercise. So you could make the argument that Alabama could just run the ball with those 3, still have some good receivers out on the outside with, I would say, solid offensive line, and then just rely on their defense, and you could say they could win it all. I think just overall, they might have the most balanced team. Alabama would be tough to stop. Next up is their SEC counterpart, Georgia. We're going to start on the offensive side, and it's all going to be about Matthew Stafford. If we do this exercise potentially next year, if we do it at least a couple years down the road, Georgia might not have a quarterback. We'll see if they get a good quarterback coming into the league. But for right now, Matthew Stafford is playing like the MVP, so Georgia gets an MVP-type quarterback to go along with some pretty good weapons. James Cook out of the backfield, Ladd McConkey, George Pickens on the outside, Brock Bowers, potentially the best tight end in the NFL. Offensive line, a little iffy, so I don't know if I love that, but when you have a quarterback like Stafford, give him some good weapons, I think that would still be an elite offense. Defensively, you tend to think Georgia has an elite defense, and I'm not saying they don't. I think putting the Eagles, essentially defensive line with Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis, adding in Trayvon Walker, adding in Leonard Floyd, adding in Michael Williams, that's a good group. Roquan Smith-Quay Walker would be one of the best linebacking groups. Secondary, definitely a question mark, and we're going to talk more about that once we kind of put these teams against each other. It's not quite as good as Alabama, and I think Alabama has the edge defensively. Georgia probably has the edge offensively with them, but it would kind of be a toss-up, I think, between these 2 teams. Third team is going to be the most fun team, and that's the LSU Tigers. It's the most fun team because LSU has a pretty good argument to be wide receiver U right now, and it's kind of hard to argue against it. When you can put Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, Brian Thomas Jr., Kayshon Boutte, Malik Neighbors, I have just as a slot receiver. When you can put those 5 together, and especially those 4 with Neighbors, Brian Thomas Jr., Chase, and Justin Jefferson, that's at any point maybe 4 of the best 12 receivers in the league, depending on how they're doing. When you have that with either Joe Burrow or Jaden Daniels as your quarterback, that right there just might be enough to win you every single game. Doesn't matter what the rest of the team is. Now, I do think they would have to have some good offensive line and at least some level of defense. If not, they might just turn it into the Bengals. I think their offensive line is okay. I think it's probably just good enough. A lot of that is how Will Campbell is going to do. He's obviously now out for the Patriots, but he had a solid rookie year. I think he's going to be a great left tackle. So if he's good, I think that settles the rest of the line that is kind of shaky after that. But that would be probably one of the struggles with the offense. And then defensively, they're still a good defense. I think this isn't necessarily a Bengals situation where it's Burrow and a ton of great receivers and a really bad defense. I think they have enough on that side of the ball that they could at least be okay. And a lot of that is Derek Stingley. Imagine if you gave the Bengals just a number one corner, that would help a ton. Patrick Queen, Omar Spates, solid linebackers. After that, again, I'm not saying this is a great defense, especially when you compare it to Alabama or Georgia, but it just has to be an okay defense because, I mean, that's an elite offense. So we'll talk more about them when we compare these teams, but elite offense, just fine defense for LSU. And then the last team of this four is the Ohio State Buckeyes. Similar to LSU, they probably have the only other argument for a wide receiver U right now, and that's because you can put Jackson Smith and Jigba, Garrett Wilson, Marvin Harrison Jr., Terry McLaurin, Chris Olave, Emeka Ibuka. Those are 6 like legitimately good receivers. Now, you could say that some of these guys maybe are a little bit disappointing. I'm looking at Marvin Harrison Jr. in particular, but still 6 good receivers with CJ Stroud at quarterback, with a way better running back group than LSU had. Quinshon Judkins, J.K. Dobbins, Trayvon Henderson, really good running back group. And I think a better offensive line than LSU. Another rookie left tackle in Josh Simmons, who is now also hurt, but he's looked good. Donovan Jackson, another rookie, and then some solid veterans to go along with it. I think it's a good offensive line. And so I think that's where they have the edge over LSU. Defensively, I think they also have an edge over LSU, but I would still say Alabama and Georgia are the best defenses. But when you can put the Bosa brothers with Cameron Hayward, Chase Young, some decent secondary guys, Denzel Ward is great, Marshawn Lattimore, definitely older, but still can be solid. It's a little bit shaky, but I think slightly better than LSU, in my opinion. So Ohio State and LSU are going to be the just pouring on. We have great offenses, we have elite receivers, and we're just going to try to outscore you. Versus if we go back to Alabama or Georgia, those are going to be the better defenses, just try to be a little bit more balanced. So then the question is, who would win? If we put all 4 of these teams up against each other, who would come out on top? I said at the beginning that I don't think it was a clear answer, and it's probably just going to be based on preference or based on how the game develops. The argument for LSU or Ohio State is just, can their star offenses be enough? And I think, to me, LSU has the best offense out of this group. If we put LSU's offense, and we'll throw them up on the screen, against, let's say, Alabama's defense, which I said I think is the best defense of this group, that would be a really fun test. Because you have elite wide receivers, but you also have an elite secondary. I mean, Pat Surtain, Marlon Humphrey, Trayvon Diggs, Terrion Arnold, Brian Branch, those guys going up against the wide receivers of LSU. I'm not saying they could stop them because I said LSU probably has the best receivers in the league, but that would be a really fun match. And I think with a good pass rush, I think Will Anderson would probably dominate LSU's offensive line, depending on how Will Campbell does. I think there's an argument to be made that as fun as LSU's offense is, Alabama's defense could hold enough that if we flip it, let's put Alabama's offense now against LSU's defense. I'm not sure if LSU's defense could hold what would be a very run-heavy, but more balanced Alabama offense. At least in my opinion. Now, again, if this game kind of gets loose and Jamar Chase gets a couple big plays, Justin Jefferson starts going off, it might get away from Alabama. And so this would be one of the games where, yeah, if it's a quick 14-0 lead, Alabama's playing from behind, Bryce Young, maybe put a little bit more stress on him, it's probably LSU. But to me, if this is a more balanced game, I think Alabama could probably pull it off. As fun as LSU is. And that's what I thought coming into this. I was like, I think LSU is probably just too much because they just have too much with their quarterback and wide receivers. But as I said, this isn't just based on position. You have to have a full team. So that would be my argument for Alabama. If we do the same exercise with Georgia and Ohio State, we'll put Georgia's defense up. We'll put Ohio State's offense. I think Georgia's defense as good as you think they might be, I would probably pick Ohio State's offense in this scenario. They just don't have the secondary to hold up with the wide receiver group. And yes, maybe you have questions about CJ Stroud, but I don't see, a cornerback room with Tyson Campbell, Keely Ringo, and Darian Kendrick holding up against Jackson Smith and Jigba, against Chris Olave, against, Marvin Harrison Jr., Garrett Wilson. I think that's just too much. And so for Georgia to win this matchup, Matthew Stafford would have to go off. And so if we flip these, Georgia's offense, which would be a fun offense against Ohio State's defense, this one seems a little bit more evenly matched, but I do think Matthew Stafford would be able to put some points on the board. I just think Ohio State's offense against Georgia's defense is just a little bit too much. So I would lean Ohio State over Georgia just based on their team dynamic. But then if we put Ohio State against either Alabama or LSU, I don't know if it's quite enough. And so I would probably lean LSU, Alabama as my top two. If you want to make the case, maybe Ohio State could beat LSU. They both have really fun offenses. I would argue Ohio State's defense is a little bit better. So if they get in a shootout, you can make the case for Ohio State, but I think LSU just has too much. I think they probably get into the final, and then it's just a matter of preference. Do you think it's LSU's great weapons? Do you think it's Alabama's defense? Do you think it's their more balanced offense? If I had to pick right now, I would say Alabama's offense, which I said a little bit ago, I didn't expect. I thought I would pick LSU just based on their firepower. But Alabama, which is no shock to anybody because they've been the best team for the last probably decade and a half, Alabama has put together just a very complete team. And the only question is Bryce Young, and that is a big question. But I think specifically against LSU, LSU doesn't have the defense to really affect Bryce Young. And so I think he does just fine. This running game gets going. The defense holds off LSU enough. I would probably say Alabama's the team. Now, if you want to come back and say all of these great teams and you want to pick the team that has Bryce Young at quarterback, I get it. And I've never been a huge Bryce Young fan, although he has looked better this past month. I just think that balance and depth would be enough for Alabama. But if you want to say LSU, if you want to say Ohio State, if you want to say Georgia, to me, those are the four best teams. I'm going to go with Alabama, though, as the best college team in the NFL right now, based on this exercise. That was a lot, and that was a lot of rosters to go through. There's a lot of players to go through. But to me, it's a fun exercise. And it was something I put together earlier this year. It's fun to kind of put a mock team together. Maybe at some point, I mentioned I'll put them into Madden, run a little simulation, see who does the best. In the end, it's going to be one of the four teams. It's going to be Alabama, LSU, Ohio State, Georgia, probably one of those four teams. I'm saying Alabama. If you think it's another team, let me know down in the comments who you think would win in a hypothetical showdown with all 12 teams. It's probably one of those four teams. You can make the case for one of the other teams if you want to, but let me know down in the comments who you think. If you liked this video, if you want to see more videos like this, we're going to do lots of fun videos coming in the next year. So if you like this, make sure to like this video. Also subscribe. We're just getting started. I hope to have a big year planned ahead in 2026. Lots of fun videos across the NFL, NBA, MLB, and others. So lots more to come. Like, subscribe if you want to see more, and we will see you in the next video.